Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Porter.
Well, thank you, Corey. I appreciate your interest in this and keeping it front and center and having me here.
Yeah, so I mean, I do want to state, like, we had a recent tragedy that's kind of brought ambulance services to the fore, but we're still finding out details, so we'll kind of stay out of those weeds. I mean, it might have been a dispatch issue, it might have been a number of things that happened there. There's certainly some investigation has to happen because something clearly went terribly wrong and had the worst possible outcome. But it's brought the issue of timely medical service to the forefront, which if you could look at it as a positive development in a sense, now's the time to get out there and talk to people and make them realize that we're all this vulnerable, and we very soon could see another tragedy like this as somebody dies waiting for medical service.
Well, Corey, people need to understand that this is not an isolated incident. These things are happening on a regular basis. It's been just a short while ago, a woman in Calgary watched her husband bleed to death for an hour before an ambulance showed up. They disconnected her call because they had calls stacked up waiting, and they couldn't keep her on the line, so they did an emergency disconnect. I've responded to one myself. My longest response time was an hour and 17 minutes for a chest pain collapse. Turned out to be an old friend of mine, and it's been a few years ago. And so these things are going on a regular basis. It's just ones like this that tend to hit the media and become an issue. And Alberta Health and EMS management response is, it's when you don't have an excuse or when you don't have a solution, Corey, you make excuses. And that's all we've seen for years.
Well, and the frustrating part is, though, there are solutions, and you've been proposing solutions, and they don't want to hear them. I mean, there's some aspects that come up, from how they did change and centralize the authorities. So suddenly rural ambulances are being all drawn into the urban centers and leaving us without coverage. Well, we didn't have a problem before. The solution is go back to when it was working. I mean, that's one of the ones I think we could kind of work towards. We had something, it wasn't broke, they tried to fix it, and now we're stranded.
Well, show me any government program that runs effectively and efficiently. And this is certainly part of that. It's we used to be cutting edge. We used to be leading edge in EMS in this province, and we can't even keep up. It's just been so frustrating and discouraging to see the failures and how far down this has fallen with no action. We have no leadership. We have no leadership in EMS. We have no leadership in Alberta Health Services. All we get is excuses and stats, and you can make stats say anything you want, but nobody does anything. Nobody will stand up and do the right thing for the staff or for patient care.
And that's exacerbating the problem. I mean, we're even hearing from other facets saying, "Oh, we just need more money. We need more resources because we're shorthanded." Well, and there's some truth to that, but they're wearing out existing paramedics through this. I imagine the stress of being in such a broken system, I mean, isn't keeping staff retention very high.
Oh, we have, last I heard was 42% of the medics are booked off. A lot of them they're just exhausted. They're worn out, and EMS comes on the news once in a while, pats everybody on the head, says how much they love the medics, aren't they wonderful? But they don't have their back, and the medics know that. And we've had a few brave medics that stand up and even using AHS's own data, and they get suspended. And one of them, while he's suspended for a week, his ambulance is out of service because they got no staff to man it. We got 350, 400 shifts a week in this province that are uncovered. They don't have enough medics. And if they did have enough medics, they don't have enough ambulances anymore.
Well, and then that's something you did bring up, I believe, again, at that town hall I went to, was the discipline on anybody who speaks up. Like, there's no real whistleblower legislation or anything to protect somebody from within the system. If they speak up, they find themselves out of a job, which only adds to the problem.
Yep. There's consequences for speaking up, and I guess that's why I've been riding this poor tired old horse for going on 13 years lobbying for this, Corey. Years. And you mean to tell me that there's not one manager, and I can't call them leaders, There's not one manager in AHS or EMS that's been able to come up with a single idea, a single solution in going on 13 years to fix this. Corey, most of this stuff could be turned around in 24 hours if we had a leader, if we had some will, if we had a desire. It's difficult to change legislation, but they did it last week. They said we don't have enough staff, so boom, they decide that EMRs can now work ambulance. Emergency medical responders can work with EMTs and paramedics in ambulance because we don't have enough staff. If the will is there, it can happen overnight. But they spend so much time and energy maintaining this dysfunctional status quo, they could spend a fraction of that effort and fix it.
Well, and then one of the things that even a layperson like me can see that I would think should be relatively easy to solve I wrote I've written a number of columns on this over the last year and change. So for a picture for it, Nico's pulled it up a couple of times. I just pulled by the Rocky View Hospital. It was just a random time in the middle of the day to have a look. And I pulled around back by the emergency area, and outside I could see, I believe, 5 or 6 ambulances all parked. And then within the enclosed garage area, it looked like there were possibly as many as half a dozen more sitting in there. And that's not an ambulance depot. That's not a storage spot. That's an emergency department. So I can only assume there's paramedics associated with those ambulances all sitting around doing highway care in that hospital rather than being out in the streets taking care of people in emergency situations. Like, what is it going to take to force the issue to say, look, these aren't nurses, these aren't doctors, these are emergency care professionals. Take these patients and let them get back to work.
They say the medics can't leave because that's potentially patient abandonment. Well, Corey, those people are in the safest place they can be. They're in a tertiary care facility. We do have a patient abandonment issue, and that's the patients that are calling 911 and waiting for that elusive ambulance to show up. Those are the patients that are being abandoned. Those are the patients that we have no business. EMS has no business treating patients in a hospital hallway. That's not our job. We don't have the resources. And when we're doing that, we can't be out on the street where we're supposed to be. And those are moral injuries for these medics. They know what's going on. They know there's 30, 40 calls stacked up waiting for an ambulance to clear some place to respond. And all you get from AHS and EMS is gaslighting. You get them coming on media on a regular basis saying, in spite of what you're hearing, we always have an ambulance available to respond, and you, lucky Albertan, get the closest ambulance. And the general public says, what's Porter talking about? Everything's good. It's true. We do have an ambulance available to respond to Calgary right now, even though they might be in code red. But that nearest available ambulance might be Fort McMurray. And we're seeing response times more and more and more, an hour, 2 hours. Last one I'm aware of was an ambulance dispatch from 3 hours and 20 minutes away to respond to an emergency in Edmonton. We see ambulances in Lethbridge responding to emergencies in Calgary. I've seen so many times when there's not a single ambulance available to respond between Area Crossfield and Lethbridge. They're doing routine transfers. They're stuck in a hospital hallway someplace. It's absolutely asinine.
And that's another issue that came up too, is using ambulances fully staffed with paramedics for non-emergent transportation of patients. Like, why is it impossible just to get a lightly equipped vehicle to move somebody rather than taking these specialized emergency vehicles off the streets?
I hear things like that all the time, Corey, from people like yourself, people, non-EMS people come up with perfectly viable solutions. Heck, I see the other day that the AHS is leaning on the public for ideas on how to solve the EMS crisis. What the heck are we paying these managers, our supposed leaders, for? We're going to the public for ideas on how to fix this. We have to form a committee. We have to form task forces. We have to have studies to figure out how to solve this. It's plain as the day is long, Corey. Get those crews out of the hospital hallways so they can do their job. Quit using ambulances inappropriately. I mean, the union solution to everything is, well, we need more ambulances. We need more medics. Likely we do. But until you start using what we have appropriately, you don't know what you need. And you could put 50 more staffed ambulances on the road tomorrow, and the only thing that would result is you got 50 more stacked up in a hospital hallway.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big problem with a bunch of levels. But I mean, is there then a short staffing in the hospital emergency areas for the hospital staff that's making them this reliant, or uh,
It's mostly a bed issue, and I don't pretend to be an expert in the hospital problems. I've got a lot of ideas that could go towards solving some of that, but that's not my area of expertise. And EMS, I told management 13 years ago, I said, as long as you're willing to let those crews sit in a hospital hallway, nothing will change. Why would it? Why would the hospital do anything different if you're covering their shortcomings, their shortfall? We
so
have no business being there. We have no business being there. And if EMS management did just that one thing today, it would be a huge step towards solving a lot of these issues.
So dispatch is another area of debate going on right now and concern. And it sounds like with the recent incident, that was definitely something went wrong with dispatch and communication. So everybody's pointing their fingers at each other. And I've been finding it pretty repugnant watching them all playing the blame game when right now we've got a person who needlessly died, and you should be seeking bloody solutions rather than trying to blame everybody for it. But something I'd heard before is one of the things with 911 that they will not and cannot tell you ever is how far away is help once you've called. Like, I'm just imagining if I were on the scene and I had this poor woman bleeding to death in front of me, and I phone and they said, well, it's going to be half an hour. You know what? I'll get the stains on my seat. I'll pack her in the back of my car and drive her the 8 minutes it was to Foothills Hospital so she can get treatment rather than sit here and watch her bleed to death. Why not let citizens get a little proactive then in these cases? But they won't do it. As far as you know, there's always somebody 1 minute away.
Yep, that's exact. There was a day when that was true, and those days are long gone. And that is something that we're pushing with our citizen action groups and different meetings we have. Is people, you need to have a plan B. You're right. The dispatchers should be telling you how far away that ambulance is, and giving you the opportunity to look after yourself. People, you need to have a plan B, because EMS cannot respond in a timely manner like we used to be able to.
But it just seems like a ridiculous rule, too. You know, I mean, why are you keeping people in the dark on something as simple as just how long is this emergency service going to be? It seems like more one of those butt covering sorts of rules rather than anything to help anybody else, just so people don't actually know how screwed up it is.
Yep. The friend that I alluded to, that I responded to that's about an hour and a half, he had a pulse and was breathing for 20 minutes after he went down. They repeatedly called dispatch. Should we just put him in the van, take him to the hospital? We're 20 minutes away. And they said, nope, the ambulance is on its way, knowing that I was well over an hour away from that location. And we got people, we got ambulance crews responding, lights and siren, ridiculous distances. I got a text the other day from a girl. She was in tears, responding over an hour away for a cardiac arrest. They're doing CPR on this guy. That's putting these crews at risk, driving high speed, lights and siren. It's putting other motorists on the road at risk. For what? What are you going to do when you get there an hour and 10 minutes later?
And
if they're doing CPR now, it's absolutely asinine.
Even a person with the most rudimentary of first aid training knows that. I mean, just time is of the essence in a number of life-threatening scenarios that can be easily solved with the right resources. I mean, anaphylactic shock, cardiac issues, bleeding. I mean, these are things that your average layperson on the street might not be able to do something about, but an ambulance can very readily, stabilize somebody. But if they're waiting too bloody long, then there's no point.
Yeah. Well, what are we doing? Why are we even responding to things like that? And, as crass as it sounds, as I said, you guys need to phone your supervisor, tell dispatch you're not going. Like, send the funeral home, as harsh as that is, because that's the reality of it. And, this poor gal that had the dog attack, and I feel so bad for that. And so angry when I heard that. And you're right. There's lots of finger pointing. So release the tapes. Release the time shots. Why not?
Yeah, well, maybe it's time, and that's one of the things is demand our provincial leaders. That's one of the things they can do is start a real investigation, not an internal one. Let's have a task force. Get on this bloody thing, subpoena those sorts of things. Let's expose it.
Well, Minister Copping announces that AHS investigated themselves on this, and he's happy to announce that we didn't do anything wrong. Everything's good. And so that gets swept under the carpet like all these other terrible tragedies that have happened, and we continue doing nothing. There needs to be a house cleaning.
And I could tell the frustration in your voice, and it's with all us. But I mean, as I said, kind of at the start, I mean, we got to keep trying. I mean, we
absolutely
win otherwise. And right now, they are in the middle of a leadership race. It's one of the few times that you get a bunch of them actually paying a little bit of attention. So hopefully, some people can make this an issue with those candidates and say, "Hey, take a stance on this. Let's document your stance. Let's get your word on this because we're going to follow up on it." And let's change this damn mess because this is just not acceptable and it's ridiculous.
And enough studies, enough committees, enough. Just do what needs to be done. That's simple. This could be, as I said before, this could be corrected in no time, could be turned around. Just if we had some leadership. We have no leadership at any level.
Well, I'll be interviewing probably most, if not all, of the candidates over the next couple of months for the leadership, and you can rest assured I'll be bringing this one up with them. Is there more you're going to be doing with your organization? Like, where can people find information on how they can try to take part and keep this issue alive and make some change?
A lot of communities, particularly around Calgary, have citizen action committees, citizen action groups. Some are very active. Cochrane, you had Brian Winters on your show here a while back. You guys did a wonderful job on that program. Brian's a good guy to contact, Cochrane. People need to understand that when, they talk about code reds, when Calgary doesn't have any ambulances available to respond, nobody talks about rural code reds. But people need to understand when Calgary's in code red with no ambulances, you can be guaranteed there's not an available ambulance within probably 100 kilometers outside of Calgary, because they've all been sucked into the city and are sitting in hospital hallways or doing calls in the city. It's not just an urban problem. And that's why you see these things where the whole southern half of Alberta's got no available ambulance to respond.
Yeah. I live in Pritis, and our ambulance is basically seems to come back to town for oil changes and then goes back to the city.
Yep, you're absolutely right.